Welcome to Stories Junction. Let's begin today's story. My name is Daniel. When my father-in-law sacked me and my wife turned her back on me, they thought they'd crush my spirit and left me with nothing. They believed they could dismantle my life and stroll away unscathed. They were wrong. This is the story of how it all unfolded, from the quiet days before the chaos to the moment everything changed. By the end, you'll see why I never shouted or begged. I didn't have to. Let's start at the beginning, where the seeds of betrayal were already taking root. Years ago, I joined my father-in-law's company in Seattle, long before I met his daughter, Elise. I was hired as a vision architect, a role that put me at the helm of a team tasked with crafting bold ideas and turning them into actionable strategies for the company's growth. My job was to blend creativity with hard data, guiding marketing, tech, and operations towards something groundbreaking. My work earned respect. My strategies turned heads. In meeting rooms, my name carried weight. But I had no clue how fragile that foundation would prove to be. Life at the company was good back then. I thrived on the challenge, and the team I led was tight-knit, churning out campaigns and innovations that kept us ahead of the curve. One spring evening, the company hosted a dinner at the CEO's sprawling estate to celebrate a recent success. It was supposed to be a low-key affair, good wine, a few speeches, and some casual networking. But that night shifted the trajectory of my life. That's when I met Elise. She wasn't just striking. She had a quiet intensity that drew you in. Elise didn't carry herself like the boss's daughter, lording her status over everyone. She was curious, sharp, and genuinely interested in what I had to say. We talked for hours, the kind of conversation that feels like it's picking up from years ago. There was a spark, something real, but nothing in her world was ever simple. Her father, Harold, had already mapped out her future. He'd chosen a suitor from their elite circle, a man with a pedigree to match their family's wealth and influence. I was an outsider and nobody in their eyes, raised in a modest neighborhood far from their gilded orbit. I saw the writing on the wall. Harold's vision for Elise didn't include me, and I wasn't naive enough to think I could change that. So, I laid it out for her. I told Elise I'd step away if being with me meant tearing her family apart. I'd rather lose her than be the wedge between her and her father. But Elise wasn't having it. She looked at me, her eyes fierce, and said she wasn't a pawn in her father's game. She loved me, and no one, not even Harold, was going to dictate her life. Harold wasn't a fool. He knew forcing her hand could cost him his only child. So, grudgingly, he gave his blessing, not out of warmth, but out of fear of losing her entirely. Our wedding was a spectacle, a glittering event in a waterfront venue with a guest list packed with tech moguls, local politicians, and media tycoons. Harold played the proud father, all smiles for the cameras, but his handshake felt like a transaction. His eyes stayed cold, his approval a thin veneer. I felt it, even then, the undercurrent of resentment that would only grow stronger. For a while, married life with Elise was everything I'd hoped for. We were partners, laughing through late nights and dreaming up plans for the future. But as the glow of the honeymoon faded, the cracks began to show. At home, I wasn't the husband who'd won her heart. I was the man who'd infiltrated their dynasty. Harold's family never said it outright. High society rarely does. They'd smile at galas and charity events, but in private, I was a ghost. Ignored, tolerated, never one of them. At work, things took a darker turn. Harold kept me on, but I started noticing shifts. Extra assignments piled up, deadlines tightened, and responsibilities crept beyond my role. At first, I brushed it off as the grind of a high-stakes job. Maybe he was testing me, seeing if I could handle the pressure. But then came the public critiques. In boardroom meetings, Harold would pick apart my strategies with a surgeon's precision, tearing into ideas that had already proven their worth. He'd do it in front of everyone, colleagues, clients, even junior staff, framing my work as sloppy or short-sighted. The same plans that once earned praise were now flaws, and I was the one holding the pen. It wasn't just pressure. It was a calculated effort to erode my credibility. I didn't bring it up at home. Elise was close to her father, and I didn't want to be the one to fracture that bond. Instead, I doubled down. I worked late, polished every presentation, and anticipated every curveball. My campaigns smashed targets, my ideas secured new clients, and my innovation streamlined operations. The results were undeniable. But when we succeeded, the credit went to the team. When something faltered, even slightly, it was my name on the chopping block. I started to see the game for what it was. This wasn't about my performance. It was about control. Harold didn't just want me out of his daughter's life. He wanted me out of his empire. And he was laying the groundwork to make it happen. Meanwhile, at home, Elise was changing. The warmth I'd fallen in love with was fading. She'd snap over small things, her words sharp and distant. One night, she said, "Maybe you don't see me anymore." It stung because I did see her, but I was drowning in the chaos Harold was orchestrating at work. I tried to bridge the gap. Date nights, weekend getaways. But she was slipping away, drawn to the glitzy events and social circles she'd once shrugged off. It felt like she was stepping into the role her father had always wanted for her. And I couldn't shake the suspicion that he was pulling the strings. The air in our Seattle home grew heavier as the months passed. Elise and I were still married, but the space between us felt like a canyon. I'd come home from another grueling day at her father's company, hoping to find some solace, only to be met with her distracted glances or clipped responses. She was spending more time at charity galas and exclusive luncheons, orbiting a world of wealth and status that felt foreign to me. I tried to reach her, to pull us back to the days when we'd stay up late dreaming together, but it was like trying to hold water in my hands. The tighter I gripped, the faster she slipped away. At work, Harold's campaign to undermine me was picking up steam. I was still the vision architect, leading a team that shaped the company's future, but every step felt like walking through a minefield. My ideas, once celebrated, were now met with skepticism in meetings. Harold would lean back in his chair, arms crossed, and dissect my proposals with a tone that bordered on mockery. "Is this really the best we can do, Daniel?" he'd say, loud enough for the room to hear. The same strategies that had driven record growth were suddenly unfocused or overambitious. My team, loyal at first, started exchanging uneasy glances. I could feel their confidence in me waver. Then came the sabotage, small at first but deliberate. A key report I'd prepared for a client presentation vanished from the shared drive hours before the meeting. I scrambled to recreate it, pulling an all-nighter, only to have Harold note my lack of preparation in front of the client. Deadlines shifted without warning, leaving my team stretched thin. Budgets for my projects were quietly slashed, while other departments seemed to have endless resources. I wasn't paranoid, patterns don't lie. Someone was pulling strings to make me look incompetent, and Harold's shadow loomed over every move. I kept my head down, refusing to let it break me. I worked harder, triple-checking every detail, documenting every decision. My campaigns still delivered. New partnerships, skyrocketing engagement, cost-saving systems, but the victories were hollow. When we won, Harold would praise the collaborative effort or single out someone else for the spotlight. When anything went wrong, no matter how minor, it was my name tied to the failure. I was being painted as the weak link, and the brush was in Harold's hand. At home, Elise was a stranger. She'd come back from her events, glowing with a new kind of confidence, but it wasn't for me. Her wardrobe had changed. Sleek designer dresses replaced the cozy sweaters she used to love. Her conversations revolve around names I didn't know, people from her father's circle who'd never given me the time of day. I tried to connect, suggesting a quiet dinner or a weekend away, but she'd brush me off. "I'm busy, Daniel," she'd say, her tone sharp. "You're not the only one with a life." I wanted to believe it was just a phase, that the Elise I loved was still there. But doubt was creeping in, and it was louder than ever. One night, everything shifted. We were in the living room, and Elise was showing me photos from a fundraiser she'd attended. She was animated, laughing about some moment captured in the shots. Her phone screen dimmed, and I reached to tap it, a reflex to keep the photos visible. My finger slipped, swiping to the next image. And there it was, Elise, her head resting on the chest of another man. I recognized him instantly, Nathan, a senior executive at the company. The same Nathan who'd made it his mission to block my every move, question my every decision, and smirk when Harold tore into me during meetings. He was Harold's right hand, a loyal soldier in the Empire. Elise's face drained of color. She snatched the phone from my hand, so fast it nearly fell. Before I could speak, she was up, storming toward the bedroom. "What was that?" I asked, following her. My voice was calm, but my pulse was racing. She spun around, her eyes flashing with something between panic and defiance. "You're seeing things, Daniel. It's an old photo, probably from some group event. Why do you always assume the worst?" Her words were sharp, but they didn't land. I'd seen the photo. I knew what it was. I asked to see the phone again, to confirm what my gut already knew, but she clutched it like a lifeline. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped, then locked herself in the bathroom. I stood there, the silence deafening. Her reaction wasn't just guilt. It was a confession. I didn't push further that night. I couldn't. My mind was racing, connecting dots I'd been too trusting to see. Nathan wasn't just undermining me at work. He was part of something bigger, something personal. And Harold? He'd always seen me as a threat, an outsider who'd stolen his daughter and infiltrated his legacy. Was he orchestrating this too, poisoning Elise against me? I had no proof, only a sinking feeling that the life I'd built was a house of cards, and someone was pulling out the supports. That moment in the living room changed me. I stopped pretending everything was fine. I started protecting myself. Every project, every strategy, every piece of work I touched, I backed it up. Encrypted drives, private clouds, hidden folders no one could access. I'd poured years into that company, and I wasn't about to let them steal my mind. I also pulled back at work. I stopped sharing my best ideas, keeping my most valuable insights off the table. If they were going to play dirty, I'd play smart. The tension at home was unbearable. Elise and I barely spoke. She'd leave for her events, and I'd bury myself in work, both of us avoiding the truth. I kept waiting for her to explain, to fight for us, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned harder into her father's world, as if I was already a memory. I was losing her, and I was losing my place in the company. But I wasn't going down without a fight. I just didn't know how dirty that fight would get, or how close I was to the edge. The days after seeing that photo of Elise and Nathan were like walking through fog. Everything felt muted, but danger was everywhere. I couldn't unsee her panic, her refusal to explain, or the way she turned my question into an attack. At our Seattle home, the silence between us was a wall, and Elise seemed content to let it stand. She'd leave for her high society events, her heels clicking out the door, while I sat in the study, replaying every moment, wondering how we'd gotten here. But I wasn't just grieving. I was planning. If Harold and his allies thought they could break me, they were about to learn who they were dealing with. At the company, the noose was tightening. Harold's efforts to discredit me had evolved into something more sinister. A major campaign I'd been spearheading, a multi-million-dollar initiative to rebrand a key client's portfolio, started unraveling. Confidential documents, including my strategic outlines and financial projections, were leaked to a trade publication. The fallout was immediate. Furious clients, spooked investors, and a PR nightmare that dominated industry headlines. The narrative was clear. Daniel, the vision architect, had been careless, reckless even, jeoparding the company's reputation. I knew better. Those files didn't just leak. They were planted. I'd secured every document, locked down every access point. Someone with high-level clearance had to have orchestrated this, and I had a short list of suspects. Nathan, the executive cozying up to my wife, was at the top. He'd been gunning for me since I joined, and his loyalty to Harold was unshakable. But proving it was another matter. The company's IT logs were conveniently incomplete, and no one was eager to dig deeper. Why would they? I was the fall guy, and the story fit too neatly to question. In meetings, the atmosphere was suffocating. Colleagues who once sought my input now avoided eye contact. My team, once a unit, was fracturing under the pressure. Harold didn't need to say much. His silence was enough. He'd let Nathan or another executive lob pointed questions about my oversight while he watched, his expression unreadable. The message was clear. I was on borrowed time. But I didn't flinch. I answered every question, presented every fact, and refused to let them see me sweat. If they wanted me gone, they'd have to work for it. I doubled down on self-preservation. Every night, I backed up my work, every concept, every framework, every innovation I crafted. I stored them on encrypted drives, hidden in places no one would think to look. I also started holding back in meetings. My best ideas stayed in my head, replaced by safe, functional proposals that kept the machine running but didn't shine. I wasn't about to hand Harold my brilliance while he sharpened the knife. My gut told me the worst was coming, and I needed to be ready. At home, Elise was a ghost. She'd breeze in late, her perfume trailing her like a stranger's. Our conversations, when they happened, were surface level, schedules, bills, nothing real. I tried once to bring up the photo, to get her to talk, but she shut me down. "You're obsessed, Daniel," she said, her voice cold. "Maybe the problem's you." It cut deep, not because I believed her, but because I saw how far she drifted. The Elise I'd married would have fought for us. This Elise was someone else, shaped by her father's world, and, I suspected, his whispers. Then it happened. I was called into a boardroom meeting on a rainy Monday morning. The email said it was a performance review, but the second I walked in, I knew it was something else. Harold sat at the head of the table, flanked by HR, Nathan, and a lawyer I didn't recognize. No one else from my team was there. The air was heavy, like the moment before a guillotine drops. The HR director opened a folder and read from a script. "Due to repeated failures to meet expectations, we're terminating your employment, effective immediately." I sat there, letting the words sink in. Harold's eyes were on me, searching for a crack, but I gave him nothing. Nathan leaned back, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. The lawyer slid a severance package across the table, generous on paper, but laced with a non-compete clause that barred me from working in the industry for 2 years. They weren't just firing me. They were trying to erase me. I didn't argue. What was the point? The decision was made long before I walked in. I signed the papers, took the envelope, and left the room without a word. As I walked through the office, past the cubicles where I'd once led a team, no one looked up. The silence followed me out the door. I called Elise from the car, my hands steady, but my chest tight. Voicemail. I called again. Nothing. I texted, "Just got fired. Your dad's work. We need to talk." No response. When I got home, the house felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. My suitcase was by the door, packed with my clothes, my books, even my toothbrush. Elise stood in the foyer, her arms crossed, her face blank. "It's over, Daniel," she said, her voice flat. "You need to go." I stared at her, waiting for something, regret, anger, anything. But there was nothing. She handed me a pamphlet for a local shelter, as if I were a tenant she'd evicted. The house, a wedding gift from Harold, was company property. No job, no home. I looked at her one last time, searching for the woman I'd loved, but she was gone. I picked up my suitcase and walked out into the rain. That night, alone in a cheap motel, I hit rock bottom. My job, my marriage, my reputation, gone in a single sweep. I could have crumbled, and for a moment I wanted to, but something else kicked in, a quiet resolve. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd broken me. They had no idea what I was capable of. The rain didn't stop that night, and neither did I. Holed up in a dingy Seattle motel, surrounded by the hum of a flickering neon sign, I sat with my suitcase and a severance package that felt more like a gag order. Harold, Elise, Nathan, they'd taken my job, my home, my marriage, and thought they'd taken my future too. But they'd missed something critical, me. The real value wasn't in their company or their mansion. It was in my head, my hands, my ability to build something from nothing. And I was just getting started. The non-compete clause in my termination contract was a steel trap designed to keep me out of the industry for 2 years. No consulting, no employment, no collaboration with competitors. They wanted to bury me, to make sure I couldn't rise in their world. But they'd overlooked a loophole. The contract didn't say I couldn't sell what I knew. It didn't say I couldn't take the frameworks, strategies, and systems I'd built, the ones that made Harold's company a titan, and turn them into something new. They thought I'd left empty-handed. They didn't know I'd been preparing for this moment. For weeks, I stayed under the radar. I rented a small apartment in a quiet part of town, far from the glittering circles Elise and her father ruled. I spent my days combing through the encrypted drives I'd safeguarded, cataloging every project, every innovation, every blueprint I'd created. These weren't just files. They were the DNA of Harold's success. Campaign architectures that tripled client revenue, predictive models that outsmarted market trends, creative pipelines that turned chaos into profit. I'd held back my best work in those final months, sensing the betrayal coming. Now, those ideas were my arsenal. The first sign of their panic came subtly. A former colleague, someone I'd mentored, texted me, "Hey, you okay? Things are weird here." Then another, less casual, "Daniel, that adaptive system you pitched last year. Any chance you kept the specs? We're struggling." They weren't just fishing, they were drowning. Nathan, the golden boy Harold had propped up to replace me, was floundering. Without my foundational work, the company was stalling. Campaigns fizzled, clients grumbled, and the spark that had kept them ahead was gone. I didn't respond. Let them sweat. Then came the calls, not from Harold's inner circle, but from the outside. Hiring managers from rival firms, execs from startups, even a consultant who'd worked with me years ago. They'd heard about the leak, the firing, the smear campaign, but they didn't buy the story. They knew my track record. My campaigns had reshaped markets. My systems had saved millions. Now that I was a free agent, they saw opportunity. I listened, but I was careful. The non-compete tied my hand from taking a job, and I wasn't ready to show my cards. Not yet. The game changer came through a discreet email, routed through a third party. A multinational tech firm based in Singapore, with offices in San Francisco, wanted to talk. They weren't fazed by Harold's legal threats or the industry gossip. They wanted what I could deliver. I met their rep in a nondescript cafe, far from prying eyes. Over black coffee, I laid it out, the frameworks that had powered Harold's empire, refined and upgraded with ideas I'd never shared. Predictive algorithms, cross-platform strategies, creative workflows that could scale infinitely. I didn't just offer them a product, I offered them a weapon. They didn't hesitate. The deal was struck within weeks. I sold them the enhanced systems, along with detailed guides to deploy them. The payment was 7 figures, wired to an offshore account I'd set up quietly. But the real payoff wasn't the money, it was what happened next. The Singapore firm rolled out my frameworks, and the market felt the shockwave. Their campaigns outmaneuvered competitors, their platforms gained traction at lightning speed, and their market share surged. Harold's company, once untouchable, was caught flat-footed. Clients defected, stock prices wobbled, and the industry buzzed with one question. What happened? I watched from a distance, reading the trade headlines, seeing the cracks form in Harold's empire. My old team was scrambling, but they were playing catch-up with systems they didn't understand. Nathan's name started appearing in panic memos, his leadership questioned. Harold's polished facade was fraying, and I hadn't lifted a finger to make it happen. I'd simply given the market what I'd always given, results. Only this time, I wasn't doing it for him. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding. The money from the deal gave me freedom, but I didn't splurge. I moved lightly, renting a modest place in Vancouver, then spending time in Berlin, keeping my footprint small. I wasn't hiding, I was untethered. No office politics, no family dinners laced with disdain, no wife who looked through me. For the first time in years, I woke up without a weight on my chest. I started consulting indirectly, offering insights to firms outside Harold's industry, staying just beyond the non-compete's reach. My name was quietly spreading again, not as a cautionary tale, but as a secret weapon. Then the email started. First, a polite note from Harold's assistant. Could we discuss a potential collaboration? Then a direct message from a board member. Mistakes were made. Let's talk. I ignored them. They'd thought I was disposable. Now they were learning the cost of that mistake. The tone shifted to desperation. A former colleague forwarded me an internal email where Harold admitted they'd underestimated my contributions. Underestimated. That was one way to put it. Elise reached out too, a single text. Can we meet? I need to explain. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the pull of the life we'd had. But I didn't reply. She'd made her choice when she handed me that shelter pamphlet. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. The world looked different from the other side of the storm. I was no longer the man who'd walked out of Harold's Seattle empire with a suitcase and a severance package. The money from selling my enhanced frameworks to the Singapore firm had given me freedom, but it was the fallout that gave me clarity. Harold, Elise, Nathan, they tried to erase me, but they'd only sharpened my edges. Now, as their world crumbled, I was building something new, not out of spite, but because I could, because I was done letting their choices define me. Harold's company was bleeding. The trade papers couldn't stop talking about it. Clients jumping ship, stock prices tanking, and a string of failed campaigns that exposed how hollow their innovation had become without me. The Singapore firm, armed with my systems, wasn't just competing, they were dominating. Their platforms outpaced the market, their strategies rewrote the rules, and their growth was a direct hit to Harold's bottom line. Every headline was a reminder. The value they dismissed was now someone else's weapon. And I hadn't said a word. I moved on, physically and mentally. I split my time between Vancouver, Berlin, and Cape Town, living lightly, unburdened by the weight of their expectations. The seven-figure deal was more than enough to keep me comfortable, but I wasn't idle. I started consulting for firms in unrelated industries, health tech, renewable energy, logistics, offering insights that skirted the non-compete's edges. My reputation was rebuilding, not as Harold's former visionary, but as a force in my own right. People talked about me in whispers. He's the guy who outsmarted an empire. I didn't correct them. I didn't need to. The desperation from Harold's camp grew louder. My inbox filled with messages, each more pathetic than the last. A board member offered a consulting role with a vague promise of making things right. A former colleague begged for a coffee meeting, hinting at opportunities to reconnect. Then came Harold himself, an email so carefully worded it reeked of legal oversight. We regret how things unfolded, Daniel. The company values your past contributions and would welcome a conversation. I read it and laughed. Regret? They regretted losing, not betraying me. I didn't reply. Silence was my answer, and it hit harder than any words. Elisa's messages were the hardest to ignore. She sent a second text, then a third. I messed up, Daniel. Please, let's talk. Then a voicemail, her voice softer, almost broken. I didn't know what I was doing. I need you to hear me out. I listened to it once, then deleted it. The Elise I'd loved was gone, replaced by someone who'd chosen her father's world over ours. The pamphlet she'd handed me that rainy night wasn't just a dismissal. It was a line drawn in the sand. I wasn't going back to beg for scraps of her affection or her father's approval. Nathan's name started popping up in the wreckage, too. Industry blogs reported he was on thin ice, his leadership blamed for the company's stumbles. The smirk he'd worn in that boardroom was gone, replaced by frantic emails to mutual contacts, fishing for intel on what I was doing. I heard through the grapevine he'd tried to reverse engineer my systems, only to botch it spectacularly. He wasn't just failing, he was flailing, and the market was watching. As their empire unraveled, I found peace. I wasn't chasing revenge, I was living it. Every deal I closed, every project I shaped, every city I woke up and was a reminder. I didn't need their validation to thrive. I'd taken the worst they could throw, betrayal, sabotage, abandonment, and turned it into fuel. The millions in my account were nice, but the real victory was freedom. Freedom from their judgment, their politics, their lies. I was no longer the outsider fighting for a seat at their table. I'd built my own, and it was bigger than they could imagine. Looking back, I learned a few things. First, loyalty is a currency. Spend it on people who deserve it. I gave too much to Harold and Elise, thinking it would earn me a place in their world. It didn't. Second, trust your instincts, even when they're inconvenient. I knew something was wrong long before that photo, but I stayed quiet to keep the peace. That silence cost me years. Third, your value is yours to protect. I shared too much with people who didn't appreciate it, but I never made that mistake again. And finally, winning doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means walking away and letting their own choices bury them. If you were me, what would you have done? Would you have answered Elise's texts, gone back to fix their mess, or done what I did? built something unstoppable in the shadows. They thought they were ruining me, but they were only teaching me how to rise. Their collapse wasn't my goal. It was just the consequence of their arrogance. And as I stand here, looking out over a new city, a new life, I know one thing for sure. The storm is over, and I'm still standing.